You just got a promotion. Before you even tell your friends, some part of you starts rehearsing how to make it sound smaller than it is. Not a huge deal. Kind of random, honestly. Just got lucky. Why do you do that? Why does your brain flinch at your own success before anyone else even reacts to it? That flinch is not modern anxiety. That flinch is software, and it was written roughly 200,000 years ago. Here's a stat that should stop you cold. For over 95% of the time modern humans have existed on this planet, there was no permanent wealth gap between people. Not because early humans lacked the ability to hoard, because they built an entire social system whose job was to stop hoarding before it started. You were not born into a species that tolerates inequality by accident. You were born into a species that spent hundreds of thousands of years actively engineering against it. Let's start with a moment that will completely reframe how you see your last team meeting. In 1963, anthropologist Richard Lee lived with the Yu/Hwanzi, a hunter-gatherer people in the Kalahari Desert. Wanting to thank them, he bought an enormous ox and gave it to the camp. He expected gratitude. What he got was ridicule, bag of bones, not even worth butchering. Did you pay full price for that thing? Lee was baffled, then irritated. Later, an elder explained it to him plainly. When a young man makes a big kill, he comes to think of himself as a chief or a big man and the rest of us as his servants. We can't accept that. Read that again. The insult wasn't about the meat. The insult was a targeted, intentional strike against the hunter's ego, delivered before that ego could grow into something dangerous. Anthropologists have a name for this pattern once you notice it everywhere: leveling mechanisms. Social tools whose entire function is to flatten anyone who starts rising above the group. Here's the part that should really unsettle you. Christopher Boehm, who spent decades comparing hunter-gatherer societies across the globe, found that these bands didn't just fail to reward dominant behavior, they punished it, sometimes brutally. Gossip first, then mockery, then exclusion from the fire, from food, from marriage. In extreme documented cases, persistent bullies who wouldn't stop pushing people around were killed by consensus of the entire group. Boehm called this a reverse dominance hierarchy. In most primate troops, the strongest, boldest individual rises to the top, and everyone falls in line. Humans figured out how to flip that entirely. The moment someone tried to act like an alpha, the whole group organized instinctively and without any leader directing them to tear that person back down to size. Why would evolution favor a species that punishes its own most capable members? Because in a band of 20 or 30 people with no police, no courts, no army, and nowhere to run, one overconfident person with more meat, more tools, or more followers than everyone else wasn't impressive. He was a threat. He could start making demands nobody could refuse. So the group became judge, jury, and enforcement, all at once, all the time. Now here's a mechanism that's even stranger and honestly more useful to understand than almost anything you learned in an economics class. Anthropologist Nicholas Peterson documented a practice among Aboriginal Australian communities called demand sharing. If you have food and a relative asks you for it, you give it immediately. No negotiation. It's not a favor, it's an obligation, and everyone in the group can invoke it. At first, this sounds like a productivity nightmare. Why hunt hard if your cousin can just walk up and take half your catch? Here's the insight almost nobody explains properly. Demand sharing wasn't charity. It was a decentralized insurance system with zero paperwork and zero institutions. If everyone is required to share surplus, nobody can ever be more than one bad week away from someone else's help. Wealth never pools in one spot long enough to become power. It keeps circulating, like currency that expires the moment you try to sit on it. Picture a single evening in a camp like this. A hunter returns with an unusually large kill. He already knows what's coming, so he speaks first, downplaying it before anyone else can. Not much. Almost missed it entirely. The meat gets divided, but not by him. An elder or a strict kinship rule decides who gets what, guaranteeing that in-laws, children, and elders are fed regardless of who actually threw the spear. By the fire that night, if anyone tries to retell the hunt like it was heroic, the group laughs them back down before the sentence finishes. Nobody becomes a legend. Everyone stays roughly level. And that leveling wasn't a nice cultural quirk. It was the actual mechanism holding the entire cooperative species together. There's one more layer, and it might be the most useful insight in this whole video. Researcher Polly Wiesner spent decades studying an exchange network among the Jew/Hawansi called Haksaro. People gave gifts to each other, not for an immediate return, but to build long-term obligations stretching across camps, sometimes hundreds of kilometers apart. This wasn't about who had the most stuff. It was social insurance with global reach. If your local area faced drought, your Hexaro partners elsewhere were now obligated to take you in. Wealth wasn't stored in objects that could be stolen or hoarded. It was stored in relationships, spread wide enough that no single disaster could wipe you out. So here's the twist that flips everything you think you know about ancient poverty. Hunter-gatherers weren't poor because they lacked the means to accumulate wealth. Many lived in resource-rich environments with real surplus available. They refused to let that surplus concentrate because concentrated wealth was never just money. It was unaccountable power, and unaccountable power was the single greatest threat to a species that survives through cooperation. Now here's the part that should genuinely change how you see the world today. About 10 to 12,000 years ago, agriculture showed up. Suddenly, grain could sit in a granary instead of disappearing into shared bellies within days. For the first time in human history, hoarding was physically possible at scale. But here's what almost nobody points out. The leveling mechanisms, the mockery, the gossip, the demand sharing, the Xaro networks, all of that ancient anti-hoarding software didn't just get switched off overnight. It got outpaced. Surplus grew faster than culture could adapt to police it. Chiefs emerged first, then kings, then a species capable of building empires on wealth gaps so vast that the poorest and richest members no longer even lived in the same reality. Here is the hidden insight underneath all of this. Wealth inequality did not appear because humans became greedy. Humans were always capable of greed. Wealth inequality appeared the moment resources could scale faster than the social systems designed to check them. The problem was never the existence of surplus. The problem was the disappearance of enforcement. Sit with that, because it's still happening. You still carry the alarm system Bohm described. That's why you feel a strange flash of irritation at a coworker who won't stop mentioning their raise. That's the reverse dominance hierarchy, still quietly firing in a break room instead of around a fire. It's why the internet erupts every time an influencer flaunts a private jet, and why there's real, visceral relief when that same person gets publicly humbled. You are watching an ancient leveling mechanism try to activate in a world that no longer has any actual power to enforce it. That's the disconnect. The instinct to level the powerful is still fully wired into you. But the tools your ancestors had, the ridicule, the ostracism, the consequences that actually landed, don't reach modern wealth anymore. You can mock a billionaire online all day. It changes nothing about his bank account. Your ancestors' insults could actually cost a hunter his status, his marriage prospects, sometimes his life. Yours mostly generates engagement for an algorithm. This is also why you undersell your own wins before anyone can accuse you of showing off. That's not humility you invented on your own. That's the ghost of a hunter insulting his own kill before someone else could insult it first, still running the exact same protective program 10,000 generations later. So next time you catch yourself shrinking good news before you even share it, or feeling that flicker of resentment at someone flaunting success, recognize it for what it actually is. Not pettiness, not jealousy. A 200,000-year-old survival mechanism built to protect the fragile, cooperative species from the one thing that could destroy it from the inside. You just got a promotion. And for 100,000 generations before you, that sentence alone could have gotten someone killed.